How could China or any country in its cities really adapt tall building design so it's not left with homogeneous skylines?
Well, it's interesting because my being here and giving my presentation at this conference is all about doing different things and being innovative in regards to how you link taller buildings with the urban habitat at ground and midway up through a building. So I think one of the main ways is you just got to link people together. Connectivity is important at all levels of a building. I think we're going to see more and more buildings that have more facilities within those buildings, which is, I think, going to be exciting. The biggest issue is going to be vertical transportation. And of course, I think providing amenities to the public at high level and bringing nature into a building is going to be very important for our future cities.
I've asked about both of those, so maybe you could elaborate on that. How would you better integrate public spaces throughout a whole tall building?
Well, I mean, every building, I mean, and especially since in the last 10 years, security is very important. There's a strange balance between, say for instance, a building has a hotel or an office building component to it, it's going to have a certain amount of security. So you have to design the ground floor spaces so that people can come into the building in the public realm and go up into those sections of the building. It's going to require more vertical transportation. We had a fantastic building in Singapore where we did that on the top of the building overlooking Marina Bay Financial Center, and unfortunately we didn't put enough lifts in. But luckily we had enough service lifts. We converted one service lift to a double-decker, and then we're able to have a fantastic beer garden on the top of a building along with a public green space that overlooks one of the most spectacular internal bays in the whole world.
Is it tough to balance the need for more programmatic space and more vertical transportation? Because if you keep, especially in a tall building, you may need several relays of elevators. You don't want too many elevators.
It's funny because, and if there's any of my Schindler colleagues, our parent company has a joint venture with Schindler in Asia. We're always challenged them to make sure that our buildings have the best lifts for the situation, whether it's in the low part of the building, the middle part of the building, or the tall part of the building. And at the end of the day, it comes down to you have to provide enough lifts. They don't have to be big lifts, but that we have to have enough lifts so that you can move people around quickly and to the place you want to take them.
Okay. What kinds of obligations does the developer have to provide affordable housing or social housing in high-rises, and how should this be handled?
Affordable housing is an interesting issue because generally it comes down to what is the land price.
Sure.
Now, I think a lot of this comes down to what is the city's or the country's philosophy on having affordable housing within a densely packed city. I'll give an example of a personal situation that my wife is Korean, and we bought property in Seoul, Korea. And when the Korean government divvies out a piece of land, they bid a piece of land, they say, okay, this development, which could have mid-rise, high-rise, whatever, you have to provide this amount of affordable housing,
right,
so that they can be sold to a different market. And the developers accept that as part of the criteria. So say, for instance, a big site comes available in the Expo site here in Pudong, which there's a lot of new property that's being developed there.
Right.
I would say the Shanghai government, the Expo district, should actually say, okay, you can have this piece of land, but you have to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing,
right,
because we're going to reduce the land price. Then, as part of the tender conditions or the site conditions, the developer has to provide that affordable housing.
right.
Construction costs will be the same, but at the end of the day, land price is a huge component of what defines affordable housing.
Yeah, and I think that model happens in the U.S. as well, especially with public land, where affordable housing requirements are given to developers when a piece of property is made available by the city or at a discount or with tax incentives by the city. Just expanding a little bit on it, do you feel that beyond logistically how that should happen, that developers have an obligation to provide affordable housing, or do you think that that's not really the place of the developer to make that value judgment?
I mean, I think it's very difficult for a developer if a developer is a truly commercial entity,
Sure.
it's very difficult for a developer to take on, I would say, the more societal responsibility of providing, I don't want to say security blanket, but housing for everyone. It really requires the government, and it's a bit like sustainability, energy efficient buildings. I've been saying this for my whole career. The only way we're going to get energy efficient cars, the only way we're going to get energy efficient buildings is the government has to dictate it, plain and simple. And they have to set a deadline, and it has to be achieved. So if Shanghai wants to have affordable housing in a high-rise tower, they have to decide how that will be done. They have to get some studies done because, again, there's the mixing of the different functions in a building like that.
Right.
But I think it has to happen. Maybe it isn't in the same tower, but it maybe is an adjacent tower that is part of a complex, a mixed-use complex that actually is a community. Because again, I think one of the issues of concern, say for instance in Pudong, you've got these massive towers and all it is a hotel and an office building.
Right.
Does it have much else?
Right.
I think a lot more thought has to go into providing more mixed-use, truly mixed-use developments in these larger developments in the cities in China and around the world.
Yeah. To that point, what are some uses of tall buildings that you feel have been underexplored to date?
It was interesting. I had to go into the hospital in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong's actually quite interesting. It has some high-rise hospitals. The Hong Kong Sanatorium, which is one of the best hospitals in Hong Kong, especially for cancer treatment. I think they added another 40 stories recently.
Wow.
It's an unbelievable building, but it does work. A little bit short on lifts. It's quite interesting when you got to move between the operating theater and your room.
And time is really of the essence.
Well, not necessarily,
Sometimes.
but you actually, when you're sitting in a lift lobby and it's cold and you just had an operation, you'd like to get to your room quite quickly. So it comes down to lifts again. But I was actually quite fascinated that it was a very, very nice experience to be recuperating in a beautiful room overlooking, well, this was overlooking Happy Valley Racecourse in Hong Kong. And it was very relaxing, right? Where a lot of the old style hospitals are kind of sanitary and they're 3-4 stories tall.
Yeah.
So I actually think that more people could look at what Hong Kong has done with the Hong Kong Sanatorium has done with its high-rise hospital. What's happening in the world at the moment, old age facilities. Again, I think high-rise buildings would be perfect for old age facilities. Where I come from in Chicago, one of the most beautiful ones in the north side, Lake Forest Place, by the Presbyterian Church. Beautiful landscaped areas and stuff like that. But older people, do they really have the ability to get out into the landscape area that much? I think it could be done in a much better way in a high-rise building.
Yeah, there's been plenty of studies showing quicker recovery time when you have a view to the outside.
Correct.
When you have view of nature.
Correct.
So this is something where the high-rise view could
Yep.
be put to great use.
Correct.
Interesting.
So yeah, old age. And there was a third one. Again, education. I was thinking about whether education was a good example or not because of what's happening with e-education, online education. But I do still think the interaction of students in a campus environment, and in the city, you're not going to have much land. So again, I think high-rise educational facilities combined with, whatever else, it could be a fantastic opportunity in our more and more densifying cities.
Any good examples of that?
I think New York must have some good examples.
Yeah.
Hong Kong University has been building taller and taller buildings. I always get amazed when I go to that part of Hong Kong, which is on the east, the western end of Hong Kong Island, how many taller buildings Hong Kong University is building on its sloping sites overlooking the western entrances of Hong Kong.
Huh.
So I think they're going to keep going taller and taller and taller and taller and just create, again, a more interesting high-rise environment for their students.
Yeah, and you think the benefit would be more interaction between students, or
I think it just provides more opportunity. You can get more students. I mean, Hong Kong
Sure.
University is is now one of the top 20 universities in the whole world, and people from all over the world are coming to Hong Kong for that experience.
Yeah.
They can't get any more land. They don't want to completely move the campus like they did at Columbia University in New York, 3 times
Do a satellite
over
campus.
100 years. They prefer that campus. So their view is knock down some of the older buildings, fill in between some of the spaces, make use of the hillside, and create taller buildings.
What can the traditional horizontal cities of China or any country in the world teach the new vertical cities that we're trying to build? And that is the subject of so much of this conference.
I think it starts with connectivity. I think it starts with a pedestrian. What is the pedestrian doing? What experiences are you giving to the pedestrian? Now, it's easy at the ground level. Nice sidewalks, nice trees, access to the transport system. But what happens in a taller city? Is it only going to be at ground? You have to look at the old Chinese city, which had education in a certain part of the city, the civic functions in a certain part of the city, residential, and it was nicely laid out. And then you had narrow lanes that came to interesting open plaza areas. I think that can be done in a high-rise context, but it just requires, I think, providing spaces intermediate in a building, which become public to the whole development. The government, in their plot ratios, would have to allow that to be free plot ratio instead of charging it, because again, developers are not going to want to provide lots of GFA that isn't really rentable to tenants and stuff like that, but that might again be a requirement of the brief. Again, a city that I think has actually been very, very good at taking the best of the West and the East in its planning is Singapore. I enjoy going to Singapore. We've expanded from basically being a Hong Kong-centric company to now having just as much office and retail space in Singapore. And it's a different environment, but it does actually, I think, look at the ancient traditions.
What is it about Singapore specifically that is attractive as a developer?
Very proactive government. I mean, we're talking about probably one of the best planned, but I'm talking about it comes down to the people.
Sure.
They get the best to work for the urban redevelopment, the URA of Singapore. They know what they're doing, they have a vision, and they keep wanting to learn more. They keep going around the world and saying, where can we do it better? They came to Hong Kong and talked to us. They looked at our central buildings. They looked at our footbridge system. They decided they preferred, instead of a footbridge system to connect all these different developments, they preferred the underground pedestrian network with nice ceiling height, nice retail offerings and stuff like that. And we bought into it as well because, again, it connected these buildings. So all of our developments in Singapore have had the requirement of putting in quite expensive, quite elaborate underground pedestrian networks that link all the buildings. So connectivity is the first thing to start with.
Yeah. Just I have one more question. I don't want to keep you too long, but a quick aside, I was thinking with integrating public space throughout a building, I think it might require some sort of a lifestyle change too, to get people to actually go in off the street and go up to a high-rise to enjoy public space there. It doesn't seem to be, or maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I don't usually think about it.
But it's no different. It's a word-of-mouth thing.
Yeah.
You come to Hong Kong, who would know that to have a really nice, inexpensive meal, you'd go to Soho district of Hong Kong.
Sure.
Right? And you have to go up a very steep hill to get to it, right? And so it's no different than going up a tall building.
Sure.
So it's word of mouth. It's people are pretty good that way. The word of mouth syndrome.
Right. Sure. What's the developer's outlook for China? Are tall buildings still the future? Or are we going to see something different within the tall building boom? Or maybe is the boom on its way out? Or moving to second and third tier cities?
Again, I'll give a personal viewpoint as well as a corporate viewpoint.
Sure.
I mean, Hongkong Land is a 125-year-old property developer that started developing property in Hong Kong 125 years ago, which is Hong Kong is a Chinese city. Okay, it was run by the British for a few years, but it's always been a Chinese city. And we're expanding, and we're looking very, very seriously at the major cities in China. We have 2 major projects in Beijing. Beijing is much more controlled than many of the other cities in regards to height limits, so it gets quite interesting. We're doing a 1.5 million square foot, 32 meter tall development, retail hotel development in Wangfujing. But at the same time, we're doing a 200-meter tall office tower in the central business district near the 3rd Ring Road. So we're doing 2 totally different developments in that same city.
Yeah.
Why did I come to Shanghai a day early? We're still looking at getting a nice development site in Shanghai. And I looked at the current master plan of Puxi, the east side of the river, Pudong, the west side of the river, both north and south, and it's fascinating what they have planned in Shanghai. It almost seems awesome to the extent of this can't continue, but our view is it will continue.
Right.
Shanghai has been and will be one of the most unbelievable cities in the world.